Today we're going to talk about TPKs, everyone's favorite event happening in any given game.
And what's a TPK?
So TPK, glad you asked, a total party kill, when your entire group of characters, not players, characters, gets killed at some point during the session. Let's go ahead and have everyone introduce themselves. We'll start with Matt.
I'm Matt Miranda, been gaming for a very long time, and right now really enjoying 5e and Adventure Conqueror King.
Excellent. Natalia, hello.
Hello, my name is Natalia. I have been a gamer for many years in different types of gaming, and just recently in the last 4 or so years, I've gotten into tabletop RPGs.
Excellent, excellent. And hey, Tracy.
Hi, I'm Tracy. I don't know, I game.
Isn't that of many words?
Exactly. And I'm Brent Newhall, game designer, indie game designer, and player, and so forth and so on. Played a bit of everything, I would say, at this point, to a great extent. So let's start out by throwing it out, the question of, do you think TPKs are good or bad for a campaign? Something long term where you know you're going to be playing for a long time, you're going to come back, you in other words, it's not necessarily, oh, they're dead, we're never going to see each other again. Obviously we're going to create new characters. What kind of impact does that have on a campaign?
I'll start at least. I think it definitely is a point that the GM and the characters know that there's obviously a shift in whatever kind of momentum that they were going forward. So whether it was part of a journey or an adventure or something like that, there's obviously going to be a shift or a change. If you think about it like in a novel sense, or in literature, there's obviously a turn. This is a turning point.
So I don't think a TPK should be something a DM should strive for, but I think the threat of a TPK should potentially always be there. If you don't think your party could lose, could fail, could be wiped off the map by the awful things that they're trying to adventure against, where's the risk? Where's the challenge? Where's the reward? If it's not there, I find it less fun.
It clearly depends on the type of game you're playing, and that you decided to sign up for, right? When you decided to sit down at the table. Like, if we're playing Golden Sky Stories, where we were just kids hanging out in a town, and there's some friendly animals visiting us, like, we don't need to worry about death.
Having a TPK would not be fun.
And if you're playing 5e, your characters are reasonably powerful, but presumably the threat of death is on the line, just so that the players have something to drive them to not be just crazy. For something like Torchbearer, like death is on, you know when death is on the line because you signed up to deal with death when you engaged in certain activities within the game, and also just that Torchbearer is known to be quite brutal and unforgiving about how it treats player characters. So there's a death spiral there that you can embrace and that you can engage when most of the time when you choose it. Like, you're also skating up towards the edge of catastrophe as you play.
That also gets to this question of player expectations, not just in terms of what the players know going in, but also you have this problem that you pick up a game, this is the game called Torchbearer, to play. Maybe none of the group knows what the game is. How easy it is for someone to pick up a game that is lethal and not realize quite how lethal it is. I think Burning Wheel is a good example, where you go into that game and it's not exactly clear when you're reading the rules how harsh it's going to be on you. And it's not a super harsh game, but some of these things just aren't really immediately clear from the game.
So I would argue, maybe this isn't true for everybody, but the flavor text where a game starts off with "Life is chill," which Torchbearer definitely starts out with, give you a good indication that the game is potentially going to involve a lot of character and potential party deaths. D&D might be lighter and fluffier because it's the large tent that everybody can play on. If you read any of the adventures, look at the blurbs at the start of any of the adventures that they've published, and most of those generally say, we're not responsible for the total party kill you're going to have, somewhere in a comedic way. Even D&D has reference to, this is maybe going to happen to you. Not guaranteed, but it might.
Right. So, as an example, the beginning of 5th edition, after the preface, The Dungeons & Dragons role-playing game is about storytelling in worlds of swords and sorcery. It shares elements with childhood games of make-believe. Like those games, D&D is driven by imagination. It's about picturing the towering castle beneath the stormy night sky and imagining how a fantasy adventurer might react to the challenges that scene presents. So yeah, that certainly does not imply, life is cheap. Well, here's an odd question. Must or should all groups start a campaign with session 0?
As a newbie, I find that having that kind of discussion, even if it's around pizza or whatever, it's not even official, but having that discussion of, okay, this is the type of game, these are certain expectations that I've seen happen in the past. The more information obviously makes it a little more easier and a little more comforting for someone like myself who's brand new to said system.
Sure.
So
there's going to be an introductory pitch, right? You're going to say, hey, I want to run or play X game because I'm interested in these particular features it's got. Here's what to expect. Are you interested? We're going to do character creation, all of that sort of stuff. Like, what are you encompassing in session 0?
I'll put it this way.
Don't explicitly call out session 0.
I know, so typically session 0 is where you establish the parameters for your campaign. Lethality, topics you don't do or don't want, things along those lines. Is that about accurate?
I'm not sure I've ever had one of those then.
Right.
Yeah, I'm not sure session 0, as you described, is something necessary per se. It sounds like a great idea and something we should talk about further. But I think as far as introducing a game and saying it's going to be lethal, if somebody, probably the person running the game, if not other players, have played this before, just the way they talk about the game and talk about character creation and talk about things like that, you often will get a feel for what the lethality is. If you're all picking up a new game and starting off fresh, you're right. But it's also hard to have that conversation because you don't necessarily know what to expect.
Well, part of the reason I bring this up is that, I started a work group with some folks who never played D&D before. And I said, "Do you want to play D&D?" They said, "Sure, great, when?" And I said, Thursday, whatever. "Okay, we'll be there." They had no idea of they didn't expect me to give them any sort of parameters, any sort of this is what it was gonna be like. Okay, it was like, "You want to play Monopoly?" "Okay, I'll be there." So I think it's easy for DMs to say, "Okay, great. Do you want to play Blades in the Dark?" "Okay, we're gonna play Blades in the Dark," without actually getting to any of these questions about, well, I like that to be really gritty. I like it to be this or that, and get that player buy it.
I think it's really important too, especially with newer players. Myself, we've had a lot of opportunities to go to local conventions, and I think it's not really a session 0, but that first 10-15 minutes is talking about the game, talking about anything that people feel uncomfortable doing. I think there is actually something to be said about that and to benefit from it even on a longer scale. If you're planning on doing a campaign, I think there's some really good benefits there.
I think that's a great point also to that idea that you don't necessarily have to have a session 0 in the sense of everyone sitting down. You can just spend the beginning of the first session just saying, "Oh, by the way, here's what I plan for, here's what I'm thinking of. Is anyone going to scream and run?"
Like if somebody has a fear of turtles and you're playing a turtle monster fighting game, you obviously want to present that information ahead of time.
What about one-shots or other short games? So not all games are going to be, a year long. And indeed, you might be playing a game like Dungeons & Dragons, but be playing it essentially in one-offs like that. What impact does a TPK have on a one-shot?
So that about wraps it up.
Yeah, you're right.
It's a one-shot.
It really ends things. I think one of the best examples of a one-shot that is sort of intended to end in something, if not a TPK, something very bad happening, is a Lamentation of the Flame Princess adventure called Deathfrost Doom. And it's not something you can necessarily play in one session. It might be 3 or 4 sessions. But you can, if you're playing it at a convention, that's one thing. It happens, you feel bad, you're never going to see these people again. hopefully they didn't pay very much to sit at your table and play your game. But if you're doing some one-shots with friends, maybe that starts a whole new... That's an opportunity to start a whole new campaign of the ramifications of that TPK that you had.
Right.
Or that really bad thing that happened that maybe should have been a TPK, but the DM felt bad about it.
Or the players fled.
Or the players fled.
Yeah. The PCs, that is, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's a less emotional investment, or at least you're going into knowing that you have 3 hours to play said game.
Mm-hmm.
So obviously those characters aren't going to exist, or those story,
Yeah.
that story happened in the 3 hours and it's done. Whereas in a campaign, it's expected, or at least I think the goal is to have it last more than a 3-hour session.
Mm-hmm.
When you're talking campaigns. So I think there's something to be said of TPKs in a one-shot versus TPKs in a campaign, as we talked about, like kind of used as a mechanic for momentum in the story, which I think separates our role-playing games from Monopoly.
Right.
It is a stop of action. So at that moment, if you do a TPK, it's that story has ended.
Why are TPKs a full stop for a game?
My experience is it's been emotional investment in the character.
Yeah.
Or it's because the party got to a thing, rift in the world, and well, we can all throw ourselves into the rift and close it up. We'll be heroes, but which, by the way, is a great way to end a one-shot. Less satisfying as a way to end a campaign.
Yeah.
Potentially.
Correct. Yes, correct.
I mean, so the player characters are the players' agents in the game, right? And the TPK, those agents are gone now, right? So, at least temporarily, the players have no agency about what's going on in the game because those characters are dead.
Yeah.
So, you keep talking about story, but the story implies, okay, the DM or the GM set aside, has a plan for what's going on, and the players are pieces in it, and they're moving along. And they're dead now, so okay, we're going to make new characters and continue on a merry way within this story. But a story can also just be after the fact. Like, a story could be what happened after you played the game, right? So it could be like, yes, you're in this situation now, you're in this dungeon now, you're exploring, you're killing things, you're taking their stuff, and now you're all dead. Like, the story could end there simply because the story was that session, and the story ended when they all died. And now that if they make new characters, they're starting a new story or a related story or something along those lines. But it doesn't have to be the same. Like, it depends on, does the GM even have a grand vision for what's going on, or is it just, we're going to play this dungeon now, and then we're going to see what happens at the end, and then something new will come of it.
And that's the thing. I think when you have a more collaborative game, TPKs actually have less of a sting, because I have a group right now where after 10 or so sessions, we decided to to move to a different area of the country with completely new characters. So it was equivalent to a TPK, in the sense that
TPK, like the characters didn't die, right?
The characters didn't die, but effectively, that story ended, and we started a new story with new characters. So from a storytelling perspective, it was the same effect. Again, in the sense that thinking back on that campaign, we had the story with these characters and the story with these characters.
I mean, that's just a change of story, right? I mean, there's an emotional impact, presumably, when your characters all die, and now you have to make new characters if you want to keep playing, or have to switch games if you're... Because there's nothing left in this one.
Well, I think in Brent's example, it's kind of like the television show, right? So you had season one ended. Season 2 is starting with new characters. I think it's not a great example too. I know what the games that Brent plays, but like American Horror Story, right? Every season of that show, whether you've seen it or not, it starts off with a theme. That season will cover the circus. Then the next season is at a hotel. So it's you have the same characters involved. It's actually interesting. I didn't even plan this example, but it's pretty good.
Hey.
You have the same actors, but it's all the scene changes. So it is a stop to that character's story. When in Brent's example, or with a TPK, that story has ended.
Right. But I think this is getting to that point that I think a TPK, like you're saying, is a very different emotional event when it happens to you unexpectedly as a result of some bad die rolls.
Well, that's what I was starting to bring up Brent, is that you've sort of made, I think, a false equivalency of campaign story ending being equivalent to a TPK. Campaign story ending is, a TV series ends.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe find out, 10 years from now, these characters got married and had a family, or this person became a lord or a lady, and this person continued to run at these, assuming a fantasy. You could always do that to give you a nice neat bow and be satisfied with the end of those character stories. With a TPK, it is generally sudden. Everybody died. They ran into the dragon's lair. They were not prepared for the dragon to be there. Dragon fire, blood, death, everything. It's over. But again, if a GM is prepared for this to be something that will happen, and the players understanding, you're going into this dungeon, you're doing something really risky, it could all end here. Then the next campaign, or the next thing the players play, could be recovering those bodies, or just trying to get the loot off of the people who died to the dragon. Party that was hired specifically to kill the dragon by the adventurer's followers, or something like that, depending on how elaborate the game has gotten. But again, the case I just described, the players knew there were consequences to their characters' actions.
Okay, yeah.
Death was likely, so hopefully they're not so mad, screw you DM, I don't trust you to end game for me anymore, and they storm off.
Right.
But all gaming is about trust, whether it's collaborative gaming or something with somebody who's in charge. There has to be some concept of, I'm expecting to have fun by what's going on. I trust the person running it, if there's somebody running it, to not throw something so blatantly over the top that it just steps on. The dice are not in my favor. I can't trust the dice, but that's where the fun happens. In that, how do we respond to these situations?
Right, that's the game. I mean, that's part of the game, right? That's the difference between just purely telling the story and writing the story versus those elements you can't control. I think emotionally, as we're talking about it, I had suffered a TPK recently.
Okay.
When it's still fresh. Tracy actually was there as well. I know, I cried, baby. But for me, it's I don't know. I get emotionally attached to my characters. It's you've spent 4 hours a session. If you've spent even 3 weeks, right? You've 12 hours building this story, and whether it's a game that going in that character is probably not going to live forever. I don't know if it's just because I'm a very emotional person and I have lots of feelings because I'm a Hufflepuff or whatever. But for me, it's like I almost feel like that character deserves the mourning period, whether it be we talk about what happened and, I don't know. For me, just tearing up the sheet and moving to the next character is kind of, for me, in bad taste. I think it's different where Matt had mentioned if I know that, okay, I have someone as a backup already started, I think it's less, it might be easier to transition. But when you have just that one character and that character is now gone, there's an emotional attachment for me in that. And I may be different than others, but that, for me, that's where I feel in those kind of scenarios.
That makes sense. So, Tracy, since you were there, what was that experience like for you?
Let me think about this. So
Italia's a pansy.
So the game was Torchbearer, and so Torchbearer has very interesting rules about character death. There are basically two or three different ways you can die. Right? One is the simplest way would be, okay, you get in a conflict and you decide it to be that you want it to be a kill conflict, and that's everyone on your team deciding, yes, the thing that we're gonna start a fight, and we want death to be on the line for that fight. We want to kill the opposing party. So once death is on the line, then death is on the line for both parties. It's not just like, I want to kill this thing. This thing can also now, it's on the line. This thing can now kill me. So once we've all agreed to that, now it's just, okay, now we engage the mechanics of the game and do our best to try to succeed. Hopefully you would prepare for this. You would find out about your enemy. You would get the appropriate equipment and weapons to fight that enemy, and you would engage it on your terms so that you have the best odds about what's going on, right? That has not happened here. I mean, that's what we attempted, but it did not work out. I don't think we did full preparation, which is a really bad idea in Torchbearer. But also, we had extraordinarily bad dice luck when we were engaging the game. So I was like, okay, there's it's a clear death spiral of like, we're losing, we're gone, which is it. But we did decide beforehand, like, yes, we want to engage in this kill conflict. Let's do this.
Did that TPK feel satisfying? Like, did it feel like the right thing to happen in the story at the time, given the mechanics and given the game?
I think story is a very nebulous concept. And when I think about story, I'm usually talking about after the fact. Like, I like to think of a story in RPG context is we played this game, and if we wanted to relate what happened in that story in that game, I would call that the story. Like, I don't.
And I agree. I
don't like to play games where the GM has a whole bunch of things planned out in advance, like plot points
Same
more
here.
than a session or two ahead, right?
Yeah, and I would tend to disagree. I think how I see story as your, especially what I love in Torchbearer about it is it's so narratively driven, even for a kind of game that you're going into where you're gonna die, because every session you say this is my goal, this is what I believe, this is so, and those change every session. So for me it's continually narrative. It's and
that's kind of what I mean is that we've all looked back on campaigns and said and tried to tell the story and like, yeah, that makes no sense. Like this person did this and that person, why did they do that? And then so that's kind of what I want to get with TPKs like that, where it is kind of the dice against you and maybe some bad decisions on your part. Do you still look back on that and feel like that was a satisfying, effective, did that feel like it was right in that sense?
I'm satisfied by it. I wouldn't say it is effective.
Okay.
Effective is a loaded term, right?
Yeah, sure.
In Torchbearer, effective means something very particular. It means I accomplish my goals at a minimum cost, or in costs that I can easily recover from so that I can continue playing, right? Okay. Here we're like, do we want to, there's this enemy I accidentally summoned because I'm...
Right, we should actually talk about how this...
I tried to cast a spell in a fight in preparation for a fight, and instead I ripped a hole in reality, and a devil boar came out, and we decided to run away. So we engaged in a conflict to run away, and we ran away at a cost, and the cost was that we were all injured, which is pretty bad. And then later on, at the next session, we're like, well, none of us, this injured outcome seems a little too intense for what was actually happening, right? Because given that we did successfully run away, and there's 3 levels of sort of compromise that you can have when you don't win a conflict outright. And we were in the middle compromise position, and injured is pretty severe for that. Anyway, the discussion we came to was like, let's re-engage. If we get rid of injured, let's just re-engage the boar under our terms. And we were like, I was like, well, let's try to kill it. Right? So that was us walking into a situation. And I think we all agreed to let's do this. So we're like, okay, let's prepare for this and let's hit it. And then there's a series of bad die rolls.
It was really, really bad.
I mean, we only had so many. We're all relatively low level characters, right? There's only so many resources they have to engage in this sort of fight, and none of us are particularly strong fighter types. So, it just didn't work out.
So it's not like you guys knew what you were getting into when you stepped into this battlefield. It was, we were doing this, we could all die. It just didn't, maybe some of you didn't realize how much of a nice edge that battle was going to be.
So I thought it was pretty well relayed that this is a risk, because we got not quite our asses handed to us, but we got beat up pretty badly just for fleeing it. And we knew fleeing it was not a good type of encounter to deal with, not a good conflict for us, but we didn't know how much better or worse a kill conflict would be versus a flee conflict. But we did know that this is a significant creature to be dealing with, and we definitely knew death was on the line. And I knew our odds were not like 80%. I figured our odds were more like 50%.
Yeah, I think my expectation too was I didn't think it would be a TPK. I didn't think we would all die, we had at least gotten into, I think at least every conflict that we had gotten into so far. And again, to let you guys know, this is a campaign. We're planning on playing this for multiple sessions. So from seeing it that way, we hadn't had any conflicts where we outright like borked, like we just failed,
lost, right?
Right. We've never lost one. So I think for me, that's where it was more emotional for me, because I expected maybe one of us, two of us, maybe to die. I hadn't gotten into this. We've never done this type of conflict in our campaign either. So I think that's where I was maybe even more emotionally invested, because I didn't see us completely losing that conflict.
So what happens in a Torchbearer campaign, or in your campaign specifically, at that point? Like, do you guys roll up new characters next session? How do you deal with, or how does Torchbearer deal with that?
Torchbearer, I wouldn't say you could just end. Torchbearer does not have rules for like continuing after death per se, right? I guess it leaves the door open in that death is merely a condition that's checked on your sheet. Presumably, you could do some high level magic or prayers or something and try to get rid of condition, or get rid of that condition. But effectively, it's like basic D&D. It's like, okay, you are dead. Let's make new characters. We took a break and we decided to play some board games for the rest of the evening. And we sort of talked about what we wanted to do next. Like, if we're still interested in playing Torchbearer, there's a Middermark campaign that they released recently, like in the last year or so. Middermark was one reason we started playing Torchbearer, or picked up Torchbearer again, was that we would like to re-engage Torchbearer. Middermark is even harsher than Torchbearer in some ways. Like, it's an inhospitable place. There are weather rules.
Weather can kill you.
Rules. So we're like, let's play a game of vanilla Torchbearer just to get, reacquainted with it. And then when we're happy with it, we can switch over to Middermark, and maybe we'll convert our characters over. And like, now it's clear. Like, Middermark, let's just make some new characters.
I think it's an interesting point that TPKs can be an opportunity for something new.
I don't think I was so prepared for it to happen in that session, seeing our past. So
sure.
I think moving forward, I will probably have a backup character in mind, or something maybe connected to my existing one. I really liked Matt's scenario you had mentioned, where you were already rolling up or kind of creating that second character. I think especially in a game like Torchbearer, that's something I might use as a mechanic moving forward. Yeah, and I think we talked about the investment too. Like, if you're I haven't played DCC, but I'm pretty sure that's the one where you have the stack of characters, right, Tracy? Matt, is that the one day?
So level characters and see how.
You're right. Like, in that sense, you're making it rain with characters. Like, there's very little. Whereas when it's a single sheet, and that's me.
With DCC, even if you didn't know when you sat down to play what was going on, as soon as someone hands you 3 or 4 character sheets,
right,
which are tinier and ready to and some GMs have like a red stamp that says "dead" on it, that they will just slap on your characters as they're gone. You get the expectations are set very quickly, right?
Right, exactly.
And because D&D is so familiar, right? The tropes are familiar for most players, even if you've never actually played before, right? There's enough media out there that it makes sense, right? People know what the deal is.
And it's called Dungeon Crawl Classics, right? So you have that sense that you are in this dangerous place. Yeah.
And as soon as your first character gets splattered, then you're like, okay, I see what's going on here.
Splattered. Oh, it's great. One thing I would love to hear, because this was really my first. I think this was my first TPK too. I know I've had characters die in D&D, so I would love, one of the things I would love, I always love hearing our gamer assembly stories, is if you guys have a memory of a TPK that was either your first or something that was very memorable. I think that would be cool to hear that I'm not alone in this world. So
I think my first TPK was in college. We were running in 3.5 the Return to the Temple of Elemental Evil. And I played with people who did not think before they took actions. And so there was this whole scenario that happened that was a random encounter that got totally out of control and resulted in one of the players basically launching a boulder at us and the bad guys and doing more damage to the party than the bad guys, and it just all disintegrated from there. It may have also involved a cart rolling downhill after the boulder. It was just a complete mess.
Wow.
We stopped playing. We all had some beer. A couple of weeks later, we built new characters and we tried again. But that was my very first TPK, and sort of a defining moment for interacting with that group of players. There on after. Don't let Danny do his thing. Danny, if you're listening to this, I still remember the other story, which is not appropriate for this podcast.
Great.
Tracy?
This might actually be my first TPK. At least
Whoa.
the first TPK that's part of a campaign. That wasn't part of, okay, this is a one-shot. Like, right, this is Fiasco where we know all bad things are going to happen to all of us, right? Mm-hmm. This is... I can't think of an earlier TPK where I was a player. I ran a near TPK in D&D 4th edition, but and that was at the end of I don't know. There were 2 or 3 introductory missions for introductory adventures for D&D, and this is the Thunder something Mountain one for 4th edition, and I was running it. They ran into the boss. They finally made it to the boss room, and they just handled it very poorly. And one guy did escape, but the rest were all dead, and that was just how we ended it. So that was it. I think those adventures were also kind of more lethal than I think they expected. I think we're not especially well written. Let's just say.
Mm. Yeah, I have not been in a TPK as a player. Just because I rarely play, everyone's always like, "Oh, you can GM for me." The curse of the GM.
Blessing and the curse.
But the first TPK I adjudicated was it was a Fate game played in ancient Greece, and
a TPK in Fate seems pretty challenging.
It was indeed. But the player characters, was it Fate? I think it was Fate. And they were all playing sort of, heroic Greek characters. And they descended down into this temple complex, and they were down to about half of their resources. They had some kind of hit point equivalent. It was wounds, essentially. So they were about half down with their wounds. One person was near death, and they came across Cerberus and charged it head on. Just no plan, no structure, just we're going to attack Cerberus. And it did not go well.
Does Fate require some sort of buy-in for, death is on the line now? Or can you just take so many wounds that it also...
Not with vanilla. Then this was Fate 2e, 2nd edition.
Okay.
So it was a little more crunchy.
Yeah, because I think Fate Core at least makes it a lot clearer, like, death is on the line for this.
So, and the thing is, they were taking, Cerberus had them in their jaws, they were taking wounds, and they just kept on whacking at it. And it went increasingly poorly for them. And I distinctly remember, just...
Outside, they were near the border to the underworld, so they were...
True.
They were in a good place to die.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's a real short trip.
Right. And we actually were joking a little bit about that maybe the next characters will be going in after you to pull you out of hell, or the afterworld rather. So on the one hand, it was weird because they clearly did not expect to die. They clearly expected themselves to just wipe out this character and just charge through. And it was kind of a shock when it... Now, I should mention, average age of that party was 15. That might have something to do with it.
That gets back to the what did you call it? Session 0 sort of concept of, letting the players know running away from something may actually be a viable option in this game.
Mm-hmm.
Just because it's there doesn't mean it's appropriate for you to expect to win.
Yeah. Totally.
I guess I'm still not super clear on what the Session 0 is. I realize that there's Yep, there's a GM to player pitch, like here's what, or consideration of like here are the kind of games that we could play, or I'm really proposing to run, or that we as a group could decide who's GMing and wants to run. And then okay, we've decided on this game, or I'm selling you this particular game. Let's talk about what the game is about, what kind of risks there are. We talk about whether character death is on the line, when or how and when character death is on the line, how long we expect to play. All of that all seems like pre-play. That's
right. That's what we're talking about.
Session 0 could be character creation, which makes a lot of sense. That's just like, okay, we've agreed to engage in this game. Let's decide what we are doing right now, what we plan on doing for the foreseeable future in this game when we make characters and when we start play. Is that all? Do you consider all that to be Session 0?
Sure.
Okay. Yeah, I think with our Torchbearer example, because Tracy and I again are in the same campaign, our Session 0, I think you do it without really claiming it that way, but I think it's a really great resource for people watching who may be new to that, where it's that sitting around the table creating your first characters together. I know for me, like when I was creating my dwarf, we were like, okay, well, where is she from? And I was like, I don't know this world. So we discussed like, oh, the GM had created a map, and these are kind of some of the things that are going on. So I think you have a Session 0 without even really labeling it that. Tracy.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Everything you said sounds like common sense to me, Tracy. It's all that stuff that just happens when you're trying to round up players. But I don't think, especially if you've never done this before, you've played in a lot of fairly short campaigns, from my understanding of your experience gaming. So it's the way it works, or else a campaign doesn't seem to work very well. For a lot of people who are just coming into this or starting back up again, remembering, oh, this was really fun in high school or college, and now I'm 20 plus, 30 plus, and I want to get back into it, or older, these are the pieces that they forget about, or in their excitement to play, glossed right over. Or
even further, they just all they've done is watch Critical Role, right? And now they're going to play D&D, but they haven't established those things they're going to do. Yeah.
Right. So I think this just gives that a formal concept, which is something Brent has really introduced more or less to me as well. It might actually be something cool for us to put up on just a brief description of this on the Gamer Assembly website.
Yeah.
So people can read a little bit more about what Session 0 is and find some links there.
Totally.
Yeah, and again, especially as a newbie, I still find myself learning new things every day. I think it's super valuable for someone brand new into this, because again, I've gone to many conventions where I'm, doing many one-shots, and I remember my first introduction to the X card, and I was like, what is this? It was just one of those things. I had no idea what was going on, and I was like, oh. What?
What is an X card?
Oh, well, it's a mechanic that's used by a GM when a game may contain subjects that people find uncomfortable, and when that comes up in the game, the player can just tap the card, and no matter where they are in the game, that will then kind of move the scene. It'll kind of leave that alone. So it was one of my very early gaming conventions, and I was like, oh, these great, where it's, stories and adventures and so much fun, and all of a sudden it was like, this is the X card. And when we tap it, you can, and I was like, wait, what? We're going to get into stuff that's uncomfortable? I was like, wait a minute, this is supposed to be a game, So I think any of those tools that can be more comforting or make it more welcoming for players to understand what's going on before they go into the action, which I think Tracy does instinctually, that, having those established sessions are really awesome for someone who's brand new.
And to be clear, a Session 0 can be 30 seconds long, right? Just kind of getting those things. I had a multi-session Session 0 for one of my prior campaigns, because we wanted to build the world collaboratively together. So, we did all of the, okay, here's where all the nations are, here's the history. We did a brief microscope session, which is a game to let you sort of develop history. And so we did all of this planning, and then we built, then we started the actual campaign. So it is, and that was all also got into kind of what topics do we want to delve into? How, do undead exist in this universe? All those sorts of things were stuff that we all hashed out as part of that. And with the right group, it's awesome, but it's also, not the right thing for everybody by any stretch.
So I have a question about TPKs. We talked a little bit about the emotional experience being on the player side of a TPK. Brent, I know you've only been on the DM screen. I've been on both sides of the TPK. Brent, when you had a TPK, did you ask yourself what went wrong? Why did this happen? Or
Sure.
What were you thinking and feeling as this happened?
Interesting. And I'm thinking back to other TPKs where that's happened. Yeah, there's definitely some soul. No, I wouldn't say soul searching afterwards. That's a little too strong. But there's definitely sort of an after action kind of thought by me about, you know, why did that happen? Why did you know, was it my fault? Is always the question, right? You know, did I throw too much at the players? And I think that for me, that's always my dominant question. Is it's certainly possible for a GM to overwhelm the players, to choose the wrong things, and I think that's something that's important to always be aware of and to ask yourself and to go back and say, even though this felt right at the time, even though I feel like my instincts were on point, do I need to reevaluate my instincts? It felt bad for me in every case. I did not enjoy watching my players, you know, suddenly realize, oh well, this is done. Well, in fact, I ran a game for Gamer Assembly back at PAX last year and did TPK, and that was one of those things where like, okay, let me think about how this thing is designed. Yeah, that would be my experience. What about you?
I like to present the image to my players, and who will probably listen to this and laugh, of being a killer GM. I really like let the dice fall where they fall. I tend not to worry about balance too much, and usually that results in a player death. When something bad happens, it's a player death and the party runs away. The couple of TPKs I've been on the DM side of have generally been involved in organized tournament play, so there's no good way for me to give some sort of Deus Ex Machina to not make it a truly ending sort of thing. But it's been one of those, this is a slow motion car crash that I'm watching and facilitating and trying to be as, look, here's what's here, here's what you have done, and it's your dice, my dice, and what somebody else wrote as my shield to not feel bad. Because I am watching this whole thing going, oh, these people hate me. They're gonna want, and some of them have come back to my tables and been thrilled to see me again. And some of them are like, no, can we have another... this happens. They blamed me, and to some degree, maybe it was a bit my fault because I didn't pull any punches. I played it straight, but you know that's sort of the way this can go. Fortunately, I haven't had that, but I have had that. Okay, we've ended a half hour early because the fight just went badly for everybody. Talk about what went wrong, and I think that discussion about that, which Natalia definitely and Tracy have had with their most recent instance, I've had with mine, or when they've been the sorts of things that I've been a part of, that's been the end of a campaign. This is the big fight to save the world. Maybe we won, maybe we didn't. We knew it was going to be that kind of fight. We all talk about it afterwards, and usually if it's that campaign ending, expected to be that campaign ending thing, the DM has something that's like, yep, the world ends in flames, good luck, we'll do something else, and we usually do a different campaign.
Well, I think that also gets to a topic that we could probably do a whole other podcast on, which is the idea of, like, if I'm a GM and I see the slow motion car crash happening, I will often shift around the some of the events and the time to allow the players to have heroic deaths, the player characters. So, if they want to throw the MacGuffin into the portal, and just as they're dying, and okay, you technically don't have an action left, fine.
Yeah.
You're able to do that. Something sort of dramatically satisfying that it isn't breaking the game.
Unless you want to have that soul-crushing torchbearer misery experience.
Totally.
Don't let them do that.
Absolutely. And then get back to the game.
It's a hard time here because it's fun.
Yeah.
It's an interesting point. I think it's a good, what you're dubbing Session 0 question is like, can there be a meaningless death in our game?
Right.
Are we engaging the rules as is? You know, dice unhidden behind the screen. Is death on the line when for roles that we've agreed that, you know, it makes sense for death to be online, or can there be no meaningless death? So you're like, okay, you crashed your car. Like, we don't have to worry about you dying here. We're just going to worry about how that hinders you further than that your car is not totaled, right?
Severely
versus like, okay, yeah, this is, you know, Dungeon Crawl Classics. You're 0 level club. You're trying to climb stairs that are covered in gore, and please make a really simple, you know, DC thing. And oh, now you are dead as well, right?
You died walking up the stairs.
Yeah, I've killed a character doing that. They warned it was covered in gore, and they're like, I'm just running off. Like, right.
We had a character in one of the D&D campaigns Brian ran, where we were in the Fae, and there were these I can't remember if they were glass or marble, but there was this very elegant, and we did have to roll, I think, like athletics to get up there because it was slippery and stuff. And we had a character that, like, he didn't die, but he took some serious fall damage. He crawled up somewhere.
Mm-hmm. All right, so in closing, let's wrap this up. So what are our final thoughts about TPKs? Good, bad, indifferent? Matt, what do you think?
TPKs are good in the situation that the players know this can happen. It's a threat more than it's something that's guaranteed, but if it happens, it happens. Everybody knew when they were going into the game what might happen.
All right. That is your final word. It has been stamped in stone. Natalia, what is your final word on TPKs?
So I think it's being aware that TPKs can be emotional, and just really not catering, but keeping in mind that it may take some time for those people to move on. And we actually had a really great, if you need a suggestion, we ended up playing a cooperative game right after that session to ease that transition.
Fair enough. All right. Stamped in stone. Very good. Tracy, final thoughts on TPKs?
If you're playing a game where death is on the line, then a TPK is also on the line. It's just part of play. So, depending on what the game is and how you're engaging it, it could be something you realize is going in as a possibility. It could just be random luck in the dice, or it could be we're playing a game that doesn't have death, or it doesn't deal with TPKs, or it doesn't have a random death, so that we're not even going to have to worry about a TPK that isn't something that we signed up for, right? It's a part of play because it's a part of the game, and you can be prepared for it. And I think Ty brings some excellent points about with the emotional impact that you might feel because of it, but you're going to have to deal with it.
Yeah, makes sense. All right, that has been stamped in stone. We'll have to have tablets somewhere.
Yeah,
but
I'll put a little counter in the corner.
Yeah, totally. No, I think these are all great points. I think you're all right. Congratulations. They are part of the game, and they need to be treated as such. I think, and to your points, that if it's a part of the game and it's there, you need to be prepared for it. You need to be ready for it, and folks need to think about that going into the game. So that's that. Thank you all very much for joining us and joining me on this. This has been another Gamer Assembly podcast thing, and we'll come up with some better way of outroing this later on. But that is the end of the podcast. Thank you all very much for joining us.
You're not invited to our game anymore.
Crybabies can't play Torchbearer. See you Tuesday.
That should have been Tracy's 30-second ending.